Welcome back, Citonauts. I'm here with Neil Somani, who is working on some very cool stuff, very innovative stuff. We're going to be talking a lot about rollups versus app chains. That's probably a big discussion for 2023 and moving forward, with modularity becoming a big thing, the Celestias of the world coming to life. So really excited to learn everything about Eclipse, which is what you are building. Neil is actually a former software engineer over at Airbnb and then went on to work at Citadel doing power and gas research. Now you're a full-time crypto founder. I think you said in some interview that you joined somewhere around 2017, a little bit crypto here and there, Bitcoin, this and that. And then you actually were involved trying to build a Terra EVM platform, basically bringing the EVM onto Terra. I guess that's also your entry into Cosmos. And then you also wrote a post about an alternate model for interchain security. So there's a lot to talk about. But first off, Neil, thank you so much for joining. And my first question is, how do you find it working full-time now in crypto versus the TradFi space? And how many times do you regret it?
What a question. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And yeah, that's a great intro and a great comprehensive overview of what brought me here. So as far as like the biggest difference between TradFi and crypto is I honestly think it's just like the level of the standard that the code that we write in TradFi is held to. I think there's sometimes where I'm like, the TradFi code is just held to a much, I want to say that the code is a cleaner standard. Of course, like it depends on the crypto team. I think after audits and things like that, then crypto obviously, I mean, we care a lot more about security. The concerns are a little bit different. There's probably a lot more that brings these two industries together than apart though. The sense that the kind of person who enters TradFi is also interested in economics. They're probably also interested in financial engineering to some degree. So I think there's a lot of overlap between the kind of people who would be interested in TradFi and crypto. And I remember even when I was at Citadel, I'd be talking about crypto with my coworkers a lot of the time, especially given the madness that was going on in 2021 and 2022.
Yeah, so talk about it, because I think you then joined full-time the crypto space sometime in early 2022. And obviously last year was pretty much the worst year in crypto history to start. But in hindsight, I think it was actually the best year because you came and everything was on fire, right? Terra just went down, or I think you joined before Terra went down, but around that time, you actually wanted to build something on Terra. Then throughout the year, we had exploits, Celsius, FTX, all that stuff. So how was that year for you? And what was your initial thought about the space and how you wanted to position yourself moving over from TradFi into crypto?
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, it was a huge bullet dodge because I literally was building on Terra, and had I entered crypto a year earlier, maybe I would have been working on that project for a year and a half before Terra depegged. And similarly, maybe I would have had like substantial exposure to FTX or Celsius or one of these other projects that ended up catastrophically failing. So luckily, I avoided all of that. And now that we're in a bear market, there's only so many things left that are reasonable to build in, and that's kind of what led me to Celestia as well, because Terra depegged and Nick White had reached out to me and he was like, "Hey, sorry to hear about that, but the Celestia ecosystem is still thriving." And I was like, "Wow, what an intro!" But it's worth looking into. So I was in Chicago at the time. I was talking with Solana folks, and they were not so bullish about the future of the industry. So just directionally, it guides you towards things that are not relying on, I guess, reflexivity or Ponzi-nomics, and instead toward things that are just sustainable even in a bear market.
Yeah, interesting. Nick has been also a frequent guest now on my show recently, so people are definitely familiar with him. Interesting to know his headhunting tactics. It worked apparently. So let's start with the July 5 report you put out, and I saw that somewhere on Twitter, and then also we had a little exchange on Twitter back in July, where you proposed or just shared some thoughts on an alternate interchain security proposal. And in that post, you said that you were thinking about where to build next after the Terra depeg, and that you see issues in almost every ecosystem, namely, for example, Ethereum, very slow, 15 TPS, Solana has stability issues, and Cosmos has a very low TVL. but you also say that you like Cosmos the best architecturally. So can you talk about what got you hooked on Cosmos in the first place, and how has that changed over the past? I mean, it's only 8 months, but maybe this opinion has evolved or changed.
Yeah, well, it's mostly just that app chains are a very natural solution to scaling blockchains and to enabling additional customizations for apps. Because if you're on a layer one blockchain, we're doing so many things to try to force Ethereum to support all applications. Whereas for Cosmos app chains, you immediately get additional throughput. You can customize the chain. The only downside is now you have to secure the chain and you have to bootstrap this validator set and corral them. So at that time, what was going on was Terra had depegged, and I was just thinking about what's the future of app chains or the future of crypto infrastructure in general. And there was one thought, and I was just playing around with a few different ideas because I hadn't quite decided what I wanted to build. So this was July, and Terra had just depegged in May. So I spent a couple months figuring out what I wanted to do next. And one idea was that there would be a flight to Ethereum. And based on that, I was thinking, what if I built some sort of like ZK Wasm virtual machine, or maybe like an ABCI implementation that took a chain that was usually using Tendermint under the hood, but instead turned it into a roll-up on Ethereum. And the reasoning behind that was kind of similar to the reasoning of Celestia, which is that a lot of these chains are probably better off as roll-ups. But then after talking with the Celestia team, I think maybe that's about the time when Celestia reached out to me. And they were like, hey, Celestia is already solving for the exact problem that you're describing. And Saga also reached out. I chatted with them a little bit with, I think, Jin Kwan or whoever else there. So yeah, that was the motivation behind the post. But as far as what that solution describes, and I still think that there's some kind of need for this, which is the issue is, and it's, I think this is kind of described in the EigenLayer white paper as well, but validators don't all look the same. So as a result, if you have like a group of validators like the Cosmos Hub, and there's some sort of governance vote for whether they should provide interchain security for some other smaller chain. For some validators, that might economically make sense, whereas for others, it would not. And in general, it's going to be the validators that are the largest or have the most resources where it makes the most economic sense for them to be doing that. So they're always going to vote yes, and the smaller validators will get left behind. So it's actually a very centralizing force to always require all of the validators on a chain to perform all work. So the reasoning here was, let's instead create some kind of fee market where people can bid something closer to their marginal cost of validating. And it obviously depends on like the chain that they're validating for, and it would depend on how are they running their hardware and things like that. But they bid an estimate of their marginal cost for validating, and then there's some market clearing price based on the number of validators that chain needs. So that's the reasoning behind that proposal. Of course, it's difficult to demonstrate that a subset of a decentralized validator set is still sufficiently decentralized. So there are some like small nuances there that make it not so simple.
Now, I also want to talk with you later about shared security, because I also covered that a lot here. I had Jihan on. We talked about also the roadmap for replicated security that is now coming to the hub. We had Sunny and Nick on in a mesh security debate. Maybe you can join one of these in the future as well. Would be really cool. But let's get deeper a little bit on this app chains versus roll-ups or roll-ups on Ethereum predominantly, but now it seems like it's also coming together with different ecosystems. So can you first explain maybe which one are you most bullish on and why, and how do you view this kind of battle between app chains and roll-ups, or however you want to call them?
Okay, so first, I think you're kind of hinting at it, but we try really hard we don't use the terminology roll-ups because we find that it's not a good term because it gets confused with roll-ups. So it's not distinguished enough. So instead we try to say app roll-ups or app specific rollups. So as far as app chains versus app rollups, I don't really view them as like in competition. And I mean, they are in the sense that anything that's an app chain right now, a lot of those should probably be app rollups instead. But in general, there's going to be many more of these app specific chains in general. So in that sense, they're both riding the same wave. As far as like how they compare to each other, the big disadvantage of a app rollup is now you have to pick a settlement layer, and to some degree, like let's say you want to do trust minimized bridging for an optimistic rollup outside of that settlement layer, then you have like the challenge period that you have to wait. But the reality is that like bridging is just a fact of life. You can use a full node bridge like Hyperlane or Layer 0 or something like that, and you can achieve single block finality bridging. So that's just how it would end up looking. And that's really no different than being on your own Layer 1 blockchain, where you would need to rely on a bridge as well. Or you could use some kind of trust minimized bridging like IBC. But that's the most really bridging is the only notable thing about it. The way that we describe it is like it's inter-cluster bridging versus intra-cluster bridging. Are you bridging between the same settlement layer or bridging across settlement layers? And other than that, the difference is roughly it's kind of social because they're cousins in the sense that in both cases you get your own execution layer, you get to customize stuff about your chain, you get all the same benefits. In many ways, I don't really see the point in spinning up a full layer 1 blockchain once all this app roll up infrastructure is finished, because you're just getting, especially once composability is fully built out, then you're just getting a worse chain. Like you're getting lower security and you're buying yourself a headache. Whereas of course you get some sovereignty, but then you can just construct a sovereign rollup, such as what Sovereign Labs or some other folks are providing.
Yeah, will definitely be interesting. I mean, DYDX, which you also mentioned in the post, is a good example of a chain that has been, or I think they're like constantly looking to maximize their to maximize the potential of their product, and now they're launching their app chain in Cosmos. But that might not be the end game, right? I think this space is so fast moving, and it's an evolution that's very, very dynamic. But let's talk a little bit more about how Eclipse works, where it comes in. On the website, it says you're not really an Ethereum rollup, nor a Solana rollup, or anything else like that. The point of Eclipse is that it can be deployed to any chain. And right now you support deploying on Celestia, which is kind of this app chain in Cosmos in a sense, Polygon, and EigenLayer, which is part of the Ethereum world. So can you maybe explain with the fact in mind that my audience is predominantly cosmonauts, so we come from this app chain world. So how would you describe, based on that, where Eclipse comes in and what type of problems it also solves?
Yeah, so a lot of the terminology behind rollups is kind of outdated, or it reflects an optimism Arbitrum type world where you have an Ethereum base layer and then you have like a rollup that's just anchored directly to it, which we call a smart contract rollup. So that's why the terminology like layer 1, layer 2, it's really easy to make sense of. In a modular world, we try not to use those terms to begin with. We try not to say layer 1, layer 2. We try not to say like, oh, this is a Solana rollup or this is an Ethereum rollup. We could make sense of that term and we could try to give it like a more clear definition, but instead we try to say this is a rollup with X as the base layer using Y as the virtual machine, something like that, which is clunkier to say, but that's just the nature of modular rollups, because you're mixing and matching the pieces across ecosystems if you're doing it with something like Eclipse. So if you're using like let's say you're using Polygon Avail as the base layer and the Solana VM as the execution layer, such as what we're going to announce later today. We were announcing Polygon SVM. But let's say you're doing a chain like that. Is that a Polygon rollup? Like, I don't know if that's really the right terminology, especially given you can just start posting blocks of data to like Celestia instead. The construction's almost identical. And now I just don't think that that's like the right way to frame rollups. So anyway, so that's what it means at a high level. It's like when you have a sovereign rollup, all you're relying on the layer 1 for is ordering transactions when you send them blocks of data. And those blocks they already have an ordering. So the layer 1's almost just, it's making sure that block is available to anyone who's querying it. And a good layer 1 that's built for this, they would provide data availability sampling or some sort of zero knowledge DA proof or something like that. But yeah, that's we're relying on the layer 1 for it, and as a result, it's very easy to swap it out.
Nice. Yeah, I think also one core part of Eclipse is the Solana VM. Maybe can you explain what is so exciting about it, and what it means also in terms of deploying rollups, or what type of use cases, or maybe interoperability it also unlocks to ecosystems like Cosmos, for example?
Yeah, so the C-level VM is super parallelized. And really the only hard part is making it so that it's fraud provable. So there's no Merkle tree by default in the C-level virtual machine. So you have to have some kind of Merkle tree that can be updated either retroactively or concurrently or something. But once you get that, then not only do you get this highly parallelized virtual machine, but you can support different bytecodes. So like Neon brings EVM support to the C-level virtual machine. So half of our chains are actually executing EVM bytecode rather than just Solana VM bytecode. And soon we're going to add in Move VM bytecode support. So we automatically get all these different bytecodes. We get a ton of parallelism. So these rollups end up being like the fastest EVM rollups on the market compared to like typical single-threaded EVM implementations, which are typically just like forks of Geth.
But then there's also compatibility with other virtual machines, or?
Yeah, so like it's the way that like Neon EVM brings EVM compatibility to the Solana VM is it's like a smart contract that lives there. It's almost like a Geth-like interpreter. So you submit, like let's say you have an EVM wallet, you sign a transaction, send it to some proxy, they wrap it in a Solana transaction and send that to the Neon EVM smart contract, where it's unwrapped, the bytecode is executed, and that's like how the EVM works. So like the state for like the EVM accounts are stored in Solana accounts as well. So they can benefit from the parallelism that's inherent to the C-level virtual machine.
And how does shared security work in that space, and how do you ensure that all these rollups are eventually secure?
Yeah, it's really like it's the roll-up vision for shared security. So when shared security said, that could mean interchain security, it could mean Polkadot division, it could mean rollups. Polkadot is kind of like rollups. But yeah, this is like consistent with Celestia's view of how shared security would look. And there's some role for like ICS to play in that too. Like with one of our engagements, and I can't say who this one is with, but there's some big Cosmos chain that will be spinning up an Eclipse rollup. And the plan is to use interchain security to provide either sequencers as a service or to verify our settlement layer or something like that.
Wait, there's a Cosmos chain that wants to spin up a rollup on Eclipse via interchain, and then somehow use interchain. How does that work? You have to go.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid to go into too many details because it's not public yet. But if you poke around, I know that you're still connected in the space. You can figure it out.
I think my job is also to just squeeze out as much alpha as I can. But I find these things very interesting, right? Like I'm deep in the Cosmos ecosystem, but I think also the spirit of Cosmos is that we also look beyond our own ecosystem, right? Within Cosmos, we have this app chain thesis, right? We have different ecosystems, different flavors. But then outside, I think that's also eventually a goal is for IBC to be implemented in all these other ecosystems. So I think it's in that spirit. Speaking of IBC, does that play any role, and how does interoperability work?
Yeah, so we implemented IBC for these rollups. So within our settlement layer, we have fast finality bridging using IBC. And then we're going to be enabling IBC between a couple of Cosmos chains. We chatted a bit with like Osmosis and OKC and a couple other chains about when we launch our mainnet, or maybe even for our testnet, we could pass an IBC message to them. We'd provide some module for verification. Then you can also like challenge those IBC messages and roll them back if the Eclipse chain gets rolled back.
So does that mean that Eclipse is the first project that basically brings IBC to be compatible with the Solana VM?
Yeah, we got a grant from the Solana Foundation for that. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, that's really cool. Yeah. Speaking of grants and such, how is the current state? I guess you conducted a fundraiser. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the partners that you're working with. Also a little bit of the ecosystem. I guess your goal is also to attract builders to use the technology stack that you're providing. So what's the current state there? And yeah, maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, so we raised in end of September. That was our seed round. We had like a pre-seed round prior to that. And so we raised 15 million, but we basically, the way that we've been doing this is if there's projects that are really early stage and we really like them and we think if that's the kind of project that we need to see exist, we just pass them to our ecosystem partners which is a bunch of venture funds and market makers that we regularly pass deals to, and they'll put together a great round for these projects. We've done this with a handful of projects so far. But where we're at right now is we've had a ton of inbound about people spinning up their own app chains or their own app-specific rollups. And we've had to cap it at just 10 folks that we're doing this testnet beta with. So we have 10 chains running, getting great feedback, many of which are going to be announced over the coming months. And I think I mentioned that we're going to be announcing one later today. And we're going to try to do something like one every week, every couple of weeks. Seems like a reasonable cadence. Just because I think it does. If you announce them all at once, I think it kind of gets lost. I also think that there's just not enough time for people to get their feedback incorporated. Some folks have made a lot of feature requests that we just have in a backlog. And the team's small. We're like less than 10 full-time people. Of course, we contract a ton of people. But as far as the full-time W-2s here in the SF office, there aren't that many of us. So our resources are pretty stretched.
I think that's actually a good approach, though. Keep it lean and keep it tight, not grow too fast. But yeah, interesting stuff. What's the timeline? And when is launch?
Yeah, so these testnets will be launched this quarter. So there's going to be some public testnets that people can start using, whether SVM or EVM. If folks have a really pressing need that's like a 10 out of 10 customer score for us, then we'll go out of our way and we will make an exception and spin them up their own chain. In general, we prefer for people to use these general purpose chains. But I mean, we're especially for areas like gaming or physical infrastructure networks, those are the areas that I'm personally the most excited about because we're just looking for these great consumer use cases in the next wave. And a lot of that might require like customizations that can only be offered by app chains or app rollups. I was just over at the Solana office last night chatting with Anatoly at Solana about something similar. Like, what is the value of rollups? And in some sense, it's not really about reducing fees. On Ethereum, it is. And in a world where we have like millions of transactions of demand per second, then yeah, they'd probably be relevant for reducing fees. But at this point, there's plenty of block space compared to the level of demand. It's really about bringing new types of functionality to applications. And what I mean by the fees are really low and there's plenty of block space is just that the stuff, like if you ever see the fees get high on Solana, it's not because there's not enough resources. It's because everyone's trying to access the same piece of state. And there's nothing you can do to reduce the fee there. It's like an NFT mint and there's only 10,000 of them and 100,000 people want this NFT. But like the only reasonable thing to do there is to increase the fee. And that's when fees should get high for a blockchain, especially when block space is abundant. And that's going to happen on rollups too. So it's not really like it's not really about cost reduction unless your blockchain is just not really, and unless you're like Ethereum and the throughput is just so horrendously slow to begin with that that you can't support as many transactions are coming in as what's coming in.
You mentioned gaming is a field you're excited about. What are some of the other things that you see that could be built, or maybe you can, without naming names, but like, you know, what type of projects do you currently have in the ecosystem? From which fields?
Yeah, I think we can name some because some of these might already be announced by the time this video comes out and stuff. So Worlds is really exciting to us. They're polychain backed, worlds.org. It's like a shooter game, and you can on their website you'll see like this great demo. But this is the type of like real game, like it's kind of a trope at this point, like, oh, games have to be fun on chain, and like it's true, but there's like so much more than that too, because the game needs to incorporate crypto in like a very natural way to produce game mechanics that not only use crypto but actually provide like something meaningful that users are willing to pay for, because if they're not willing to pay for it, then it's not a sustainable source of yield. So that's like kind of the high level on why I'm excited about the game, because I also think that the founder is very next generation thinking and he's seeing where crypto gaming is heading. Another game that I just think is really interesting is Curio. It's like a gaming development team, also went to Berkeley, so they're close with a lot of Cosmos folks.
Nice. Cool. Final thing. What about is there going to be a native coin in the Eclipse world, and if so, what's the utility and what's the use cases?
Yeah, we haven't thought through the tokenomics a ton at this point. We have a few different like models that we're considering. You can imagine a world where you just charge like a haircut off of transaction volume, like a penny or a fraction of a penny per transaction. But when you're letting people spin up their own chains, like imagine if Cosmos somehow had some mechanism to do that, you'd be like, how, to what degree am I actually sovereign if I have to pay this like rent-seeking middleman? So maybe there's like alternate ways where you could formulate this where you require some amount of the Eclipse token to be staked in order to use the settlement layer. Or maybe you pay per, like, I don't know, the number of blocks that you're getting settled. So something that's like more consistent with, like you want to somehow align incentives so that the chain is benefiting and they get continued or increased benefit by using or holding the Eclipse token. And that aligns with our model for what a successful vision of Eclipse looks like. So that's something that we want to put more thought into. In any version of a successful vision of Eclipse, it'd be people using the chains and building in these customizations, giving us great feedback. So that's what we've been focusing on right now. But the next step is definitely thinking about what would like Eclipse's compensation for this end up looking like. And there are folks who are treating this more as like a services model. They just charge like 100 grand a year fiat. And they're like, I'm going to charge you 100 grand to run a sequencer. And that's it. And that's like a approach. I think it's reasonable. But I don't think that's a very crypto native model. And I think I'd be a little bit disappointed if that's where we landed.
Yeah, I think we're still in this early phase in the entire industry where economic incentive models and alignments need to be refined, right? And replicated security just went live. Maybe we can wrap it up with that. Went live up for voting for the community. And also, I think the feedback that I'm getting as a content creator, you know, a lot of community members reach out to me. It's like, how does this, like, how do I benefit from this, right? Like, do I get paid for that, or like, what's my motivation to vote yes for that? But how do you view that specifically on the Cosmos Hub, since you've been also writing a little bit about ICS? What are your thoughts on that? And what would be maybe an advice you could give for the rest of Cosmos as an ecosystem and cosmonauts as a community?
Yeah, so I guess the question is kind of about like value accrual for Atom. Is that the question? Yeah, it depends on how you view Atom in the ecosystem. If Atom is like the token for Cosmos, then I think it makes sense that it should accrue value. And a lot of people hold Atom as a proxy for the Cosmos ecosystem. But if you don't view it that way, and I think that's like a completely valid view, given all these chains are supposed to be sovereign. There's not really like a canonical token that represents all of Cosmos necessarily. If that's the case, then maybe it's just a public good and it doesn't really need to accrue value. And all these efforts to like give additional utility to the Cosmos Hub, whether it's interchain security or whatever else, maybe it's not like really strictly necessary, you know, and there should just be more development of the core tech, like more progress on IBC itself, or the interchain security stuff is interesting, but it's not really specific to the Cosmos Hub. It's something that any of the chains can provide.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of the general perception that Atom equals Cosmos, but as you say, it's an internet of sovereign app chains. And yeah, I think I'm excited and looking forward to see also Cosmos tech go outside of Cosmos. That's why I also wanted to talk to you and learn about the Solana VM, IBC connection, modularity, how it's all linked to Celestia. So yeah, I think this was a cool intro. Maybe we can do this again in also a different context, maybe in a shared security context with Sunny and Nick. But yeah, this was really cool. Thank you so much for coming on. Is there any final stuff for anybody that now listen to this, like, man, this sounds cool, I want to get involved, I want to learn more? Where should they go? Yeah, the biggest thing is follow us on Twitter. It's Eclipse FND on Twitter. You can follow me. It's not my first and last name. Instead, it's Neil Salami, like the meat. So that's my Twitter handle. And yeah, if you DM me on my personal Twitter, or you can DM the Eclipse account, and you're really excited about an app roll-up use case, let us know. In general, we found that things like DeFi aren't a great use case because there's liquidity fragmentation and there's other issues there. It could be a good use case for a large enough protocol. But stuff that's really interesting to us is, like I mentioned, gaming, physical infrastructure, consumer use cases. So things like social networks or like on-chain GDPR tracking, such as what Wave is doing, on-chain proxies like Wind. So a variety of use cases, especially if you're building something different. That's what we're really interested in, on-chain Uber or ride sharing or whatever. These kinds of provocative ideas, other ecosystems might reject it. We'll take it because we think it's really interesting and we're happy to support those kinds of things. So yeah, that's the summary. Nice. I think there's a lot of room for future interviews and content. Thank you so much for doing this, and also thank you everybody for watching. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.